Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to return to the topic of resilience and business. Okay, so the term resilience, when we talk about resilience, we're actually talking about two constructs. A subject, and resilience is an attribute of that subject that protects the subject from some offending object, okay, the second construct. So, we talk about the resilience of what and the resilience against what. Now, entrepreneurs, they may not use the word resilience a lot, but they certainly obsess over it. In particular, their business model or their startup. It's a risky proposition, okay? What can put their proposition or their startup at risk? The entrepreneur will tell you the biggest risk comes from what academicians call Schumpeterian disruption. Essentially, a competitor comes out of nowhere with a better idea and even better execution, takes the entrepreneur's customers and lunch, and that's the end of that. There's less malevolent disruption that entrepreneurs are also concerned about, and that is natural and man-made disasters or tectonic shifts in the economy or in the market. I'm not going to talk about those subjects. I'm going to talk about the resilience of the entrepreneur herself or himself. What is the offending agent for which we're trying to protect ourselves? The entrepreneur herself or himself. Okay, now you might be wondering, well, these are supposed to be two separate constructs. How can the subject and the object be the same one? Well, it turns out, yes, there are many risks in entrepreneurship that are beyond the control of the entrepreneur. I mentioned a few. But as it turns out, that most of the threats to the entrepreneur are in fact self-inflicted. And that's what I want to talk about today. In case if some of you are entrepreneurs, maybe you can catch yourself making these mistakes, or if in the future you find an opportunity and start considering entrepreneurial aspirations, you can make sure you don't fall into these mistakes. So, before I get into details, a quick acknowledgement of some terrific colleagues. Working with them is what led to the discovery of some of these self-inflicted wounds. Ellen Thomas, right here in NJIT School of Management, the Martin Tuckman School of Management. She's professor of marketing. And a couple hours drive south of here at Rowan University, we have the president of the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Eric Ligori, and Susan Santos. She's the chair of the USASB Conference on Entrepreneurship Education, if anybody is doing anything in January. It's a great place to go. So, what are the threats to the entrepreneur? Not to the business model, not to the startup, the person. Dean Shepard at Notre Dame University has an interesting typology. He comes up with three factors. He calls them the triple D. There's the downside to entrepreneurship. This is when the entrepreneur invests all of her or his money in a startup and it fails. And there's a good chance that it's going to fail. Okay? Know that. Tremendous loss of capital. Okay? There's the destructive side of entrepreneurship. This is interesting. This is when everything in principle goes right. This is when the entrepreneur is able to secure funding, launches a product that the market wants, has revenue, has more revenue, now is covering his expenses, now is profitable, and growth. And after going through this whole process and is financially rewarded, she or he realizes that this business model is actually causing tremendous damage to the economy or to the environment. And it's a little late in the game to shift, or shifting is going to mean tanking the company. And then there is the dark side. These are the negative psychological and emotional responses to failure, or perceived failure, or perceived looming failure. And in fact, depression and anxiety are rampant among entrepreneurs. Now, how do we address these 3 Ds? Good news for the downside and the destructive side. There are many ways to address the loss of capital. I mean, if you've lost it, you've lost it. But we have methodologies such as the lean startup methodology that says, don't put all your resources into the launch of a company because it will very likely fail. Maybe you'll be lucky. Don't count on that. Instead, plan your resources such that you can launch a company, pivot it, which might mean relaunching similar or dissimilar companies, let it evolve over several generations, pivots. And you might have to do that a dozen times before finally you get a business model that works. You get revenue. And this is especially true for startups that are based on some technological innovation. And that is what we focus on here. You know, the T for NJIT does stand for something, right? And it is these innovations that, I'm an engineer. Engineers, we love innovations, but they introduce uncertainty. It hasn't been done before. That's why it's innovative. That adds risk. Plan for that failure, okay? Maybe you'll be lucky. There's a good chance that after 12 pivots, you might be lucky. Or you should really be out of the game. Point is that for the downside, there are methodologies to manage that. Even for the destructive side, congratulations to the new generation of entrepreneurs that value social entrepreneurship, okay? And social entrepreneurship doesn't mean nonprofit. You can be a for-profit company and still have a social conscience in the business plan, in the charter of the company. So, the first 2 Ds of Dean's triple D can be addressed by methodologies that are now accepted by the entrepreneurship community. Which brings us now to the dark side. This is tougher to address because it requires entrepreneurs to change their behavior. And even more difficult, it requires them to change their behavior from ways in which, at least in this country, in this culture, they believe is how they should be behaving. And I'll get to that in a minute. Certainly, if you're going to make this argument to an entrepreneur, change your ways, you need to back it up with data. So give me a minute, because I'm a professor and I'm an engineer, so I got to give you data. Otherwise, I'm just not, It's what I do. You want to change my behavior? Good luck. So, the colleagues that you saw a few minutes ago and we looked at 5,000 startups that were all formed in the year 2004. All sorts of industries: tech, non-tech, product-based, service-based, all domestic, all in the US. And we tracked them for 7 years. Just those 5,000. Well, you can see after 7 years, 60 of them perished altogether. 30 of them were profitable. Okay, they're doing fine. We've got some in yellow, which cannot continue being in the yellow zone for much longer. They're either going to fall into the red group or fall into the green group. Okay, and we looked at all this data. We have tons of data on each of those companies. their financial information, their strategic information, their HR, who did they hire? Remember, these started as small companies. But in this data, plenty of information on each of those companies each year. And we were wondering, is there anything about these companies that can make us academicians predict if they're going to be successful or not? Okay, is there a halo around the entrepreneur that we can detect in the data and say, this guy's going to be in the green zone, this guy's going to be in the red zone? It turns out there is. And it's collaboration. Don Sebastian said a few minutes ago that it's a team effort, it's a group effort. Indeed it is. Entrepreneurs who collaborated tended to survive better, get much more revenue than companies and entrepreneurs who did not collaborate. Now, what do I mean by collaboration? Collaboration is not doing business with. You go to Home Depot to buy a hammer, you're not collaborating with Home Depot. If you are a manufacturer of hammers and you are wholesaling hammers to Home Depot, you're still not collaborating with Home Depot. Maybe if you're trying to return something without a receipt, you're collaborating with Home Depot. I don't know, that's in the yellow area. But collaboration in this sense is the exchange of tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge, that is, two people exchanging information that is in their heads, not codified in a document or a blog. Because you can get that data without having to collaborate. Okay? And collaboration requires face-to-face interaction. It requires trust. It requires intimacy. It requires immediacy. Okay? You are responding to facial cues. It's a social behavior. It's a social interaction. Collaboration, it can't be done exclusively in email, and even Skype is so-so. So that's what I mean by collaboration. So we saw that collaboration, the exchange of tacit information, improves significantly the chances of entrepreneurial success. Okay, big deal. A lot of people already knew that. Okay, the administrators of regional economies already knew that. The administrators of this university already knew that. And that is why these administrators all over the world have been deploying these clusters, these centers where you have a lot of entrepreneurs within a certain industrial theme, maybe a biotech incubator like what we have here at NJIT, or maybe a cluster for some other industry. We have accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces, just clusters in general, thematic office parks. And the purpose of these is to foster have so many entrepreneurs all under one roof that they can't take 3 steps without bumping into somebody that is in their discipline, and have an exchange of that tacit knowledge, which we now know yields improved success in entrepreneurship. And yet, the dark side of entrepreneurship thrives in these places just as well as everywhere else. So something is going wrong with this value proposition that we need to put together these centers, and that somehow entrepreneurs will be more successful. Which led us to this hypothesis. Perhaps putting somebody in one of these centers, an entrepreneur, perhaps giving that person access to this social capital doesn't imply that they're going to use it. Okay, so let's make a distinction between having access to social capital and actually using it. So we looked at that green, yellow, red curve that we saw, that data, And we evaluated how success was depending on if these companies were in a high-density area, like an incubator, or if they were the only company within a 10-mile radius in their industry. Well, sure enough, collaboration decreases risk of firm failure by 43%. So in other words, every time you collaborate, you are improving your chances of survival. Terrific. But this we didn't expect. We figured that people in incubators or high-density clusters would collaborate more than companies outside of these things. And that wasn't the case whatsoever. Collaboration makes a big impact. Being in one of these centers did not change whether an entrepreneur was going to collaborate or not. In other words, an entrepreneur is going to collaborate whether or not she or he is in a place like this. That entrepreneur will not collaborate regardless if you put that person in a place like this. So, brings us to the expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So, what does this have to do with the dark side of entrepreneurship? Like I mentioned earlier, we have to change the behavior of entrepreneurs, and that's going to be particularly difficult in the United States because there is this notion here that entrepreneurs need to behave in a certain way. And it's very different, we found out, than it is in Europe. What am I talking about? You ask folks in the United States, what is successful entrepreneurship? Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. They'll mention individuals, self-fulfillment, self-realization. It's an individualistic experience. Okay? It's a very lonely experience if that is indeed your model for successful entrepreneurship. In Europe, it's very different. The successful entrepreneur is maternal or paternal, surrounded by the employees. It's not innovation, it's growth. We also asked educators, entrepreneurship educators in the United States and in Europe, are we putting our entrepreneurship students into harm's way? Because there's no denying this stress that's going on. And the responses were voluminous. I was expecting everybody to say, yeah, we're doing a great job. No, it turns out that us entrepreneurship educators are very critical of our own work. In the United States, the most common response from entrepreneurship educators was, we are sending students unprepared for the brutality of of entrepreneurship. In Europe, the response is, we are sending students thinking that entrepreneurship is a solo act and it needs to be a social act. So even the entrepreneurship professors still don't agree on what's the best solution. Even entrepreneurship professors in the United States tend to call entrepreneurship a solo act, and it isn't. So, to quote Mario Cortez, a good teacher will lead a horse to water. An excellent teacher will make that horse thirsty first. Okay, yeah, that's good. Got it. So the horse will not only go to the water, but will actually drink. Maybe it's my Spanish background, and I like fine wines, but I think that an even better teacher is one that makes the student thirsty for the right drink. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid, but engage in the societal aspects of entrepreneurship. It's what makes us human anyway. Otherwise, someday the entrepreneur will be replaced by an AI engine. Ugh. That is what I have to say. This is my advice to you, present or future entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship educators. Thank you.